The Photo Vault. A journey into vernacular photography, archives and photo books. Hi and merhaba to this episode of The Photo Vault. We are in Istanbul. For those who have not been here yet, it is a bustling city with wonderful markets of all kinds, enormous traffic jams, magical ferry rides from the European to the Asian side, and an intense energy wherever you are. The city is a feast for anyone interested in history as a true crossroad of cultures, empires, fates and politics, with remnants of the Byzantine and the Ottoman times on every corner. And all of that embedded in this mega city that always feels like a melting pot of East and West, because that is exactly what it is. My favorite thing to do here after I arrive is to hop on a ferry, order a tea or chai, and eat a simit with it. That is a sort of crunchy circular bread, and then I look at the Bosporus. In the last years, Turkey had enormous economic recessions with massive inflation. It also had a crackdown on many cultural institutions, journalists, artists, and the free press at large due to its politics in charge. Turkey has a fascinating photographic history, as Constantinople, that is what Istanbul was called prior to the new republic's formation in 1930, was a place for many early photographic pioneers to apply their skill and services. We are meeting with photographer, educator and publisher Cemre Yeşil Gönenli. Besides her own practice as a photographer and bookmaker, she also runs a bookshop and coffee in the very hip Karaköy district, only 30 seconds from the Bosporus, on the European side of Istanbul. Karaköy is sort of a maze of restaurants and coffee places with a new massive cruise port, a more humble ferry port, and many stunning Ottoman times buildings. Before we dive into this conversation with Cemre, a brief info: you can listen to my mini summary of this talk at the end of the podcast at about minute 48 in case you are too busy today to listen to the full conversation. Cemre, we are sitting at FILbooks in Karaköy in Istanbul, sort of in the heart of Istanbul. We could step out from FILbooks, your bookshop, and go into a ferry, cross over to the Sultan Ahmed area. We could also cross over to the Asian side and stroll around Karaköy. We're sort of in the heart of this immense city with an immense history, 2,500 years of movement, of different people, of different, of like life. And it's an intense city in many ways. It's whenever I'm here, you feel the energy, you feel it takes you that energy. How do you think that influences you as an artist, as a photographer, as a maker, to be in this specific place? Because it is a very specific place with a very specific energy.
Difficult, you start with a difficult question. Okay. Istanbul is a very chaotic city, but I love it. I mean, it is like there are a lot of people, friends, family members who really just want to run away from the city. And sometimes I question myself, like, okay, everyone is trying to run away. And sometimes I also, it's a lot of rush. Which is tiring, of course. But I think, although sometimes I complain about this, I think I like to be tired. I like to function. So I can't just imagine like living in a village and in such a serenity and calmness. I would just get bored. Whereas here in this chaos, chaos can be good and bad. So I think both of these sides are feeding my soul in a way. And because you talked about this kind of movement around, also in terms of transportation, you're very close to tram, you're very close to ferry station, you're just in front of the historical Istanbul, the peninsula. So it's super central as well. And in a way, being in the center of the city makes what we are doing, a bit more accessible maybe to people who don't know it. I mean, when I first opened it, it was like, do you have books to read? And I was like, it focuses mostly on photo books. And I was like, okay, what is a photo book? So in a way, when I first opened it, I tried to kind of push the medium to people, so that people kind of get to know a bit that this is a medium, and photographs could end up in books, and that's also a piece of art. So from this, I mean, being central and being in the middle of movement, I think helped the situation maybe.
And for you you're a photographer and artist, but you're also a key essential photo book maker and a publisher. Like, is that, do you see in Turkey where the photo book publishing, I mean, a lot of people print here, but maybe the photo book publishing world is not so big locally. You have almost like an educational role then when you say, people come to you and say like, oh, what is a photo book?
Well, it's not like people come to me and ask like, what is a photo book, but it's more like people just, perhaps it's also a cafe, and come to, have a coffee, and they just look around and they get to know, okay, what is this? Oh, it's interesting. A photo, like a book just with images, like, it's like a new thing for our country, I think, still. I mean, even for the world, it's, in a way, this photo book, how can we say it?
Universe.
Exactly. So it's like it wasn't there 100 years ago, although people produced photo books, but it wasn't like a market as it was today, of course. I mean, I don't know if there was a photo book market in Arles when it was, in the festival
In the very
many years
beginning,
ago.
yes.
Probably not. So
I'm adding here some information for those who are not aware of what Arles is. Arles is a city in the south of France that has hosted a photo festival for more than 50 years, and it has become one of the most important festivals in Europe.
I mean, I'm a very little publishing house, so you can't get big. We have very good printing labs in Turkey, and many other, as you said, many big publishers come and print in Turkey, which is great. But in terms of publishing houses, it's very few, and everything we have, it's also like, they're all little businesses trying to kind of really trying to sustain it and making a lot of sacrifices. And so it's not a business, it's not a market really. It's more like people who are really passionate about it, and who really, who are artists actually. So we don't have someone who's just a publisher, So it's always the artist who initiates some other artist to produce a book, to make a book, to edit a book, to design a book. And you just can't count more than 5 or 6. I don't know. I mean, it's very niche and very little. So when we have all these little book fairs, it's like, I buy from another table buy from me. There is a Turkish like saying, "Körler sağırlar, birbirini ağırlar." It means the blind people and the deaf people, they host each other. So this is kind of the situation in Turkey. So we don't have a lot of really collectors that, that invest in photo books, really.
Is that one reason why you start publishing yourself? Because there is not so much opportunity within Turkey to go with other publishers?
Exactly. I mean, there isn't a publisher that, specializes in photo books or artist books even, that I would love to go and say, would you publish my work? So I always try to do it in Europe. Like if I needed to approach publishers, I needed to do it not in Turkey. Also because we don't have enough buyers. I mean, it's like, of course, these two things are very much connected. If you don't have enough buyers, who would publish them? So it's not a market. It's not a. I mean, obviously, this comes back to the reality of a bad economy in Turkey. People don't have this. It's like, even now we have like photo books in stores. So I think people who are like an outsider to this photo book world or photography world or artists world, it's like you don't pay this much money to a book, but actually it's affordable art, so it's very, it's like, it's,
I mean,
yeah.
I would say that's even far-fetched in most places in Europe or in the US, where you say this book is affordable art, as in, it's not an art print that costs you 10,000 euro, 5,000 euro, 3,000,
exactly.
2,000, 1,000. It's a lot of art prints within one book that cost you 50.
Yeah.
But I mean, that conversation still is also not very far spread in Europe, I would say. But I mean, with that enormous economic crisis at the moment, and that inflation of the last year was 100%, or
Yeah. I mean, 100% is the one you can see. this is like literally everything you bought. It's just like doubled. But because this is a situation, there's also the unseen part, which is probably much higher.
Yeah. Yeah, which means that as most books are, even if they're printed in Turkey, they are from publishers somewhere else. So if they're re-imported, the books are basically unaffordable for anyone.
Yeah, for a lot of, I mean, rich people buy books in a way. Yeah, which is not good because, it's one way of self-education and, being self-taught and stuff like that. So it's not helpful.
I mean, you also teach photography here, and you also teach, I mean, in that sense, bookmaking and what the photo book is.
Yeah.
Is there, you feel a large desire for photographers to go into that, or is that just not reachable, the photo book itself?
I mean, I think it's a very personal path. Like if like there are some students that they really want to kind of hold their work in their hands, or kind of it's not about, okay, I need to make a photo book. It also doesn't, for me, it's also doesn't never start like, okay, I need to produce a new book. I always need to have a reason why this work needs to end up as a book. And like, for example, I taught a photo bookmaking class in one of the universities for over the course of 3 years. And there, like, as an outcome, you had to make a photo book. But of course, it was very new to them, like to the students, because it's not something that you would see in a regular bookshop. You don't have a photo book section mostly. I mean, we have a couple of like good museums that have some more like nice books, but it's not, you don't have some controversial photo books there. It's maybe more like big publishers that we all know, like super famous names, more like monographs and stuff, but not like you cannot really explore the punk side of it. So and this is what I am trying to do, but it's also, I mean, I used to, for the bookshop, I used to order many more, like I used to order from little publishing houses. I was kind of trying to find small like niche publishers, so I could just have them. I could create my own taste. But now I'm also trying to sustain the business. Unfortunately, I'm also kind of ordering books that are more sellable, so I can have a bit more space to the ones that I am in love but hard to sell, that they're very specific. And when it comes to the teaching, I wouldn't say it's not accessible, because production wise, you can produce everything in Turkey, as you know this better than everyone. You come here to produce many things. So that is good. I mean, if you want to produce something, you always have a person to produce it for you, which is not probably the case in most of the European countries. And here, everyone is kind of specialized in producing something. So that's great. So when I gave this photo book class, I took them to a printing lab. So we kind of talked through this and that. So it is accessible to produce it. But but not, I mean, it's quite hard to make a big print run and sell it or share it, really.
Sure. Well, I mean, thinking about like the students I'm engaged with most of the time, which is in the US and in Europe, everyone wants to make a photo book. This seems to be like the natural course or the desire. Basically, it's like the photo book is part of it already.
Yeah, you have to do it if you want to become a photographer.
Yeah. Even if the work has no shape or space yet, or it doesn't make sense as a body yet, but already the photo book is articulated. So
yeah, I mean, when, for example, like there was one student of mine, she was a very good photographer, and she wanted to make a book like a bit too early, and I was like, you're going great, but just continue what you're doing. You're putting things in layout too early, and this is going to limit you. Expand it, just work a bit more, and then you would know much more and what kind of a book it should be after you work on it. So I think it has to be a process. It's not like, okay, I take these images, blah blah blah, and then you bind it and it becomes a photo book. Of course, it's not working like that. So I totally understand what you're saying. It's like the thing to do if you're a photographer, because it's easy to share or whatever. But yeah, I think then you don't have the essence of a photo book if you rush things.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Let's talk about one of your books that also has to do with archives, sort of one of our focus in the podcast, and also has to do with the history of Istanbul and where that sort of movement, culture clash, the development, especially in the last, let's say, 150 years, where there was so much change within Istanbul, and technology and mediums also had something to do with that. So your book, Hayal Hakikat,
Hayal and Hakikat, but you
Hayal
said it
and
nicely.
the Handbook of Punishment, and
A Handbook of Forgiveness.
that's beautiful. We'll definitely share some photos of it, the way you open it, the way you maneuver through the book, the way you can explore different chapters and open it from different angles. It's a stunning book. What is it about?
Okay, what is it about? It's a story, actually. It's, for me, one way of telling a story that I was stunned when I first kind of came across it. It's a story that comes from Ottoman Empire. One of the latest sultans, Abdul Hamid II, he planned an amnesty to celebrate the 25th anniversary of his crown. And he ordered prisoners to be photographed so that he would choose who to free by looking at their portraits. So I read this information, but this was very interesting for me. I was like very much suddenly curious about, okay, like what kind of images these could be. Like if prisoners were photographed for a chance, for the possibility of, to be forgiven, how they would look like. But I didn't know if this archive is still alive. Like, where is it? I didn't know anything.
Because this was taken in like 1800s.
Exactly.
80s, 90s,
Yeah. It was. So what I did, I just tried to chase the images, and then I went to a library as a part of Istanbul University. It's like rare items library, so it gets like, you have to have I don't know, like it's difficult to get in, but with a help from a teacher that I know her there, I got in, and then I found them. Like, I thought, "Oh, it can't be this easy," and I was very much and like I couldn't even believe I reached at the archive. And then what I saw in the archive was that, so they were like portraits of individual prisoners. It was like a beautiful album, and there were like 4 portraits on one page. It was like a family album as a format, but it's prisoners. So there was immediately something that took my attention, and I knew that there was a story behind this. I just realized that the hands of the prisoners were always very central, and they were kind of, it wasn't natural. Like, it didn't feel natural. Like, it was impossible that every prisoner would just pose like this. I thought maybe it's a matter of like respect or something.
So they
but
were close
still,
to the body, the hands?
yeah,
or
they're
how?
just like across their chest or belly, but they're always like, they're too much visible. You can just understand it from the body posture that it's not the way you would just sit if someone in charge, someone from the government is taking your picture. But I didn't know why. But I always had this interest of hands, like photographs of hands. So that was also like very much. I stopped looking at the faces of the prisoners, but my just gaze as a viewer just went for the hands of them. And then I took the scans. I went home, but I still didn't know what was the reason behind it. And then I found an historian who was an expert on Abdul Hamid II, and she enlightened the story behind this hand situation. And she said that there was a pseudoscientific information that Abdul Hamid used, and that he believed if the first joint of your thumb, if it's longer than your index finger's first joint, that it's more likely that you commit a crime, which is obviously very absurd. So from this information, we understand that this was a brief given to the photographer, something probably like make sure their hands are visible. But I don't think the photographer would actually know this story behind, because it's not like all the images you can measure this, little detail, but in all of them you see the hands. So probably this was like a bad brief given to the photographer. So this was very stunning for me. And then also I found another group of images from the same archive that had a collection of images of prisoners that have nothing to do with this amnesty, but they are sentenced to death, so they're gonna die in prison. So when I came across this kind of two different groups of images, that they were visually very strong, like I literally had goosebumps when I first saw the images for the both categories. It just made me it made me think a lot about today's Turkey, because obviously the absurdity in deciding freedom for the prisoners, I just saw a great bridge in between, this and today's world, because yes, nobody looks at our hands, or nobody measures this, but kind of this craziness
with other arbitrary
exactly
ways of how you can get punished here right now.
Yeah, so I was like, nobody looks at the hands, but you can be judged in the same absurdity. And then, in Turkish, the title Hayal and Hakikat, it means dream and fact, but it also has this kind of, it's a language. The word, especially Hakikat, is a word that my grandfather would use, for example. So it's not a contemporary word. So it's still kind of, it comes from the old language a bit. So it means like dream and fact. So in a way, I named the hand part, the prisoners with showing their hands, Hayal, because it was the dream of becoming free, just as if we as a generation trying to become free. Whereas the other side, that you never have a chance to be free again, it's the brutal reality of captivity, of not having freedom. So I wanted to kind of create a clash in between these two opposite concepts and two frameworks of dreaming and facts, and how different they are, to refer to the past, but also to think about today, because after what happened in Gezi Park protests, I think we as a generation, we just felt too much heartbroken, because we felt as if we're going to win something, as if we're going to be free again, as if we're going to, come together, because it was the very, very first political event that started to protect some trees, but then it became something that really united a lot of people from a lot of backgrounds, like, people that I would never think to come together with. We were fighting for a simple tree, so we fought together against a force that we can't actually fight. So I think because we were heartbroken, and because we had some casualties, we lost it. Like, okay, we didn't let the government to build a shopping mall in a park, but in the end we were heartbroken, and we lost the point of fighting with government. So I don't go to protests anymore, but also I didn't feel comfortable in this in the situation. So for me, it was one way of making a silent protest, to say that actually we're not okay. This is not okay. So I wanted to comment on today through past.
The Gezi Park protests, to give you some context of what Cemre mentioned, were protests that started in 2013 against urban development plans in Istanbul's Taksim Gezi Park. But as the sit-in strike was met with extreme violence by the government, they sparked protests around the country in regards to issues such as freedom of the press and freedom of assembly. After these demonstrations, there was so much clampdown on protests, and I was curious to hear from Cemre why she decided not to show the faces of these prisoners in her book, but just the body, and if it had something to do with her protesting.
Why? Because in a way, first of all, I didn't want to re-record them as criminals. I wanted to give them freedom. So although you have this golden edges on the upper part where their head should be, you have like an open spine, because it's in a block format.
Yeah.
It's not a book that opens sideways, but from up, like a notebook, notepad. Because it's like a brutal gesture of cutting their heads, almost like with a guillotine. So even the decision in terms of design was okay to keep the upper part very rough, very like I don't know, sudden, like cut, papa, and and also maybe I wanted to kind of continue my gaze, because when I first found the archive, as I told you, I went for hands. I didn't have anything to do with the faces.
Right.
I was very much interested in the body posture, the hands, the feet, and the costumes, the things they were wearing. And maybe one more thing about how I came to this story. How did I find it? Because I talked about the clothing, that you also see a variety of men, that are coming. Like there's one with a suit, one with a very casual t-shirt.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't look like it's a regular prison gown. It's like
exactly right.
So
there's
diverse.
A fashion. There's an understanding of fashion. No, actually, when I read this information, that this very initial one I told you about, Abdul Hamid, blah blah. Reşat Ekrem Koçu was a writer, an historian, a novelist, that wrote a crazy thing called the Encyclopedia of Istanbul. And Salt Beyoğlu, which is a very important like art institution, they took over his archive, not only like archives of the printed encyclopedia, but even the research material. So they wanted to make a database for everything he had. So it was a very long project they run. And then they invited 3 artists to make a body of work departing from this encyclopedia. And I was luckily one of them. So this was the information I found. And there he also mentions, this archive is great if you want to get some insight about what people used to wear, what men used to wear back then. So it also gives a variety of, clothing, the tailoring, whatever.
Looking at these clothings in the book did make me think, after the interview, of the enormous cultural diversity that was present during that time in Istanbul or Constantinople. You have to imagine that it was an empire, the capital of an empire, that inhabited Anatolian Turks, Greeks, anyone from the Balkan, the Middle East, Armenians, and of course other Europeans. Istanbul was one, if not the most cosmopolitan city at the time. What is incredible when you look at these images, that you get inspired to think about what is not there.
Yeah, I always think actually a good photograph is a photograph that makes you think about what's not seen in the image, because it helps you imagine things that are kept outside of the frame. So here, I think that was also something. I always have this kind of hunger to go for the invisible in the photograph in many of my works. Like I think this is my thing about photography, always kind of thinking about the unseen, thinking about the hidden, thinking about the covered, thinking about what is kept away. So although photography, I think, seems like a medium to show, I think it's all about keeping, because it's so crazy how it shows a lot of things, but it always hides more than it shows. So I really like this dynamic about photography. I think that's the core of my love to photography. And maybe that's also, connects to what you said about faces.
The hidden element Cemre talks about is clearly visible in a project she worked on for a PhD.
It was a failed PhD.
That's right. Who needs to finish PhDs? A failed PhD, as she said. And parts of that made her explore hidden mothers. That means photographs of mothers that were hidden behind cloths and curtains, rags and backdrops in order not to be seen while holding their children in front of the camera. Jeffrey Batchen, who we had in a previous episode, wrote extensively on the subject. I wondered where Cemre's interests in the hidden mothers came from.
Yeah, I think it's very much connected, as you said, with my love to photography, about this, what's hidden, what's shown, what's kept away, what's given, and hidden mothers. It was something I saw many years ago when I was still studying photography in college. One of my professors talked about it. And today, although he thinks that you were the one who showed me, I was like, no, you were the one who showed me. So we still don't know it. But when I first saw this, I was just stunned by it. It just gave me, again, goosebumps. And because for me, what was very stunning is that although, in this tradition, it came out as because of a lack of technology. I mean, just to say for people who don't know, basically because of long exposure back then in 19th century, it was very difficult to hold the baby during the exposure time. So somebody had to hold the baby during the exposure. So the photographers very naively covered the person who's holding the baby so that it is, because it's supposed to be the baby's photograph rather than a baby mother's double portrait.
So under a dark blanket and then some
Exactly.
hands are sticking out or something like that.
Yeah. And it's also like since the beginning, I think this kind of mirroring, because back then also photographers are under a black cloth. So I was, I just found it so romantic that the photographer is under a black cloth, the mother is under a black cloth, and like two people are in darkness just to make a photograph of a baby. And baby doesn't know anything about this. Like, I just love this, scenery.
You see the romantic side. I'm thinking right away about the hidden mothers because they're not, they're not visible in society. And it's like, I see it much darker.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I never thought about it like that. Yeah, of course, there's the sacrifice there, of course, as always. Mothering is sacrificing, that's for sure. But what was it about it? I mean, when I figured this, like when I came across with this tradition, I was in like early 20s. But when I decided that I want to kind of really dig further into this, I want to learn more about it. I want to collect these images. I want to, recontextualize this concept or whatever. I was also going through a stage in my life where, I wasn't a daughter almost anymore. Like, of course, I was my parents' daughter, but in a way, I suddenly had to be an adult. I had to have a lot of responsibilities, make money, earn a life, have a career. Like, I had to become someone. And I was suddenly out of my comfort zone. And I also started having this kind of wisdom tooth pain in my like jaw. And that also felt very like crazy. And I just thought also like, it's like wisdom tooth. Like now I need to have some wisdom. I just thought in your mid-20s, you have this kind of sudden change that you suddenly start to mother your mother. Although, she wouldn't perhaps need a help, it just changes. Like, the dynamic of the relationship changes. And I just realized when we cross a street, I'm the one who is kind of, looking, I'm the one almost like, like
holding her hand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean,
that's for sure. So this shift in the conventional role of mother and child relationship really got me thinking further through hidden mothers, because I thought there's something similar. Like, although hidden mothers, you have the baby and mother, I thought, okay, you're an adult now, but you actually need that support. Like, it's not going anywhere. This need is still there. But just because you're 20 something, you have to act like you don't need that anymore. So I think the hidden mother images really made me face this reality. They helped me to grasp this concept of becoming an adult. So I think that was my love for these images, like, that you need to behold. And it also and then I based a whole research around this. I mean, the original PhD research started with this, but then I also started to think about maternal space. What does it mean to be, to behold, to what? And then a lot of psychoanalytic theory came in. I became interested in reading all these concepts like holding environment, preparation theory, this and that, which connected with photography somehow and the hidden mother tradition. So, and then I also, this hidden mother tradition gave a framework for me to create new images, to think about hidden mothers in today's world, through today's photography. So I kind of
but you also included your mother in that process.
Yeah, my mother, and I also photographed my friends, some of my family members with their mothers.
Well, in between, you became a mother.
Yeah.
So your son is also involved in that process.
Yeah, but it was like there was a huge gap in between. I mean, the whole project took me 10 years to finish, because I started as a PhD work and then I dropped out because I just felt, I mean, I was writing papers in an academic thing. So I wrote I don't know how many pages for years. And then I was getting feedbacks like, okay, you're writing like an artist, not like a researcher, which is something that it's also included in the book actually. But you know, I really struggled trying to find the right voice. First it was academic, then it became much more free, and then I started to work with this great editor Gonzalo Golpe, who kind of asked me a very important question when we were in the process of editing, because I rewrote all this academic text in a poem almost. I tried to turn, I mean, it was still the same ideas, feelings behind the text, but it wasn't academic. The feedback I get was, okay, you are talking about great things, but your text is in a jail, in an academic jail. You have to free it, you know, like you don't have to reference all the time. Just speak your heart, you know? And then he just asked me, who is your reader? I was like, my mother was my reader. And he said, like, do you think she would understand this text? I was like, no. Okay, then write it in a way your mother would understand. And then I just started to write in a much more accessible way. And then I found the right voice, I think. So yeah, in this all 10 years, as you said, I became a mother. But when I started to work, I was not close. I mean, I was having a rock and roll life, nothing to do with you know, becoming a mother. So of course, becoming a mother also gave me the courage to go back to the work I left half, because it gave me another perspective. Now I was the one under the cloth. I wasn't the one that was, you know, being held. So that held. Yeah, I keep forgetting the past of this. So yeah, in a way, I think now I understand it. Actually, I needed to be a mother to be able to complete this work. So yeah.
No, but it's super fascinating how I mean that starting point where you say like the starting point for your interest in photography is not what is being shown, but what is being hidden, and that those hidden elements are what keep you being interested and actually keep you being curious. So then, as let's say, if there's a young photographer listening and now is thinking, so how can I photograph the hidden? You know, So, I mean, and that's really where I think in a lot of your work, especially when we look at the book Double Portrait, and you see these images, like with your mother, where that hidden element is that emotion. That hidden element is that sensitivity, that sensibility between the people that we feel.
Exactly.
And that's so strong in that book, actually. And yeah, I mean, I can absolutely reference to that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because a feeling is not visible. So I think probably I'm after this. And that since you mentioned kind of this, I would also kind of go back to a very early work I did in collaboration with Maria Strum, which is for bird's sake. It's again also about being hidden. I mean, it's a relationship between birds and men, but one part is invisible. So it's exactly the same with what's happening with hidden mothers. So it's again, you know, we never see the bird, but I'm after it. I'm after this relationship, which one part is invisible. So yeah, I think that's my photographic burden.
Photographing the hidden. Yeah, I mean, for bird's sake, that's a book where you're documenting bird lovers, bird keepers.
Yeah.
They also, I mean, they raise birds. They have these beautiful cages. It's a community here in Istanbul.
Yeah.
And the books are also beautifully made, like a bird cage. But that's, when did you do that? That's already a while ago.
2015.
Yeah.
It's been long.
And you and Maria, you researched together. I mean, you're two photographers, which is actually quite rare because collaborations often happen between, like, let's say, a writer and a photographer, but that actually two photographers get together and make a photographic union. That's very rare.
Yeah, that was an amazing experience for me, I guess also for Maria, because I think, I mean, I learned a lot from her. I guess she also learned from me. Like the process was because we were very different. You know, I was too Turkish, she was too German. In a way, she was very strict about certain things. I was a little bit too loose about certain things. So I think, I mean, we started very differently, but then along the process, we sometimes didn't even remember who took which picture. And it was like, I think the reason why that project worked very well is that we became one in the end, and that we never thought about kind of doing, okay, these are Maria's pictures, this is Cemre's pictures. It was like two women becoming one in a world of men and birds. So I think that was the that was the magic behind that work. And yeah, we're lucky, I think.
Well, I think that's a beautiful sort of almost perfect ending to also encourage people to get away from the me world, because in the photography and of course as well, we have a lot of like, this is me, this is my voice, this is my photograph, this is my way of seeing, and you had this beautiful work, long-term research that also ended up into an amazing book and project that was all about coming together. And it's sort of that unity of two people and two photographers and two ways of seeing. And yeah, that's fantastic.
I love collaborations. I mean, because photography is such a lonely thing to do. I think like you have to be alone when you're photographing, when you're editing. I think not necessarily when you're editing, but in a way it's so much in your brain. So I think I always feel like when I'm, for example, working on a solo project, I feel like I wish there was another me, so I can kind of create a debate and
bounce it off.
Exactly. So that's why I really like to and that doesn't necessarily have to be an artist. Like, it's better because, then you get more inspiration. You know that, like when I talk with you, for example, you just gave me inspiration, But yeah, I think photography in the end is something lonely to do. And I don't like loneliness a lot, I guess. So I think that dialogue, whether it's, this collaborative side of photography really feeds my soul. So sometimes I'm like, I wish I have a partner always to work with. But it's also like, I think it's good that you do these things like project wise, that you're not married to a, photographic dude or artistically. It's not a good idea to marry because, it's, I don't know. I mean, there are duos that do it greatly.
As our conversation came to an end, I did wanted to dig in a bit deeper into the current political restraints for artists. After all, she does criticize punishment in today's environment.
Ooh, well, I mean, it was censored once, but it was acted as if it wasn't censored. But no one is stupid. Like there was a series on states there was a documentary series about contemporary photography on a channel, on a TV channel,
a state
channel. And it's a beautiful series, by the way. I was like, wow, I'm stunned that they're kind of, having this contemporary photography series. It's amazing. And they're like young photographers, good artists. And I was so happy to be one of them. And then, of course, I talked about Hayal Hakikat because it was like a really like long shootings for 5-6 days that focused on all the works I did. I mean, not all, but many. And we spent a lot of time, working on the Hayal Hakikat. And in the end, it was like nothing about it in the final edit. And I was like, how come? And then they said, it's too long and they have to cut it. It's not a decision, blah, blah. But of course, because of the way I talk about it, they decided not to put it. I mean, I think I knew it. The director knew it. And I was like, okay. But I still thought, I'm not going to say, okay, I'm not in because of this. But I was very, very lucky to exhibit the work in a beautiful museum in Istanbul, in a private museum. So, for me, that was what I wanted to do. So, yeah, I mean, it was censored like this, but also it was very, I think the work was exhibited and brought more attention in Europe compared to Turkey. Although it's a very local story, it's global in a way because, you have this kind of government, like this brutal government situations around the world in many, many countries. So it's not specific to Turkey. I mean, this is just like one example. So in Turkey, I mean, yes, it was exhibited in Sabancı Museum, Sakıp Sabancı Museum, which is an amazing museum. And I was able to exhibit it in a perfect way, like in a way that I was so happy with, in like large scale, real life-size prints.
Yeah, I saw it. I saw it was, beautiful installation, and you could actually feel the images and the details and the.
Yeah, I was so lucky to exhibit it there in the way I did, and it was also in a beautiful room with 3 other artists, and all the works they kind of communicated in a really nice way. Like, for example, the wall across my work was only faces, portraits of people who are living in Istanbul, like random people. And in the middle, we had Ege Kanar's sound installation.
Ege Kanar is a fellow Turkish artist who does work with vernacular photography as well, just as a reference here. Back to the images of the book, it is also fascinating to think about the person who commissioned these photographs. Sultan Abdul Hamid II, who actually was in love with anything new, like Western inventions and technology.
Yeah, he was a guy who was in love with the West world, and he was very interested in photography and also like things like crime fictions. And like, for example, we know that he invited the writer of Sherlock Holmes and gave him a big present. So, you know, but he was like very much in the palace. So that's why he used photography to get to know his own country, I think. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's not like someone who touches the public, but he used some technology and like kind of he tried to kind of spread through different mediums in a way. So he was an interesting guy, this is for sure. And he was also the first guy who opened a photographic like print lab in the palace. So he was really supporting photography. And I think that was probably the reason why we have more archive from that era. Like he's a key figure.
Yeah, I mean, Constantinople is really well documented. That's one reason is that. Thanks a lot for the conversation, Cemre.
Thank you.
Let's close it up here. I summarize it by let's look for what's hidden.
Nice summary.
Yeah, nice summary. That's it. Cemre is looking for what's hidden. That was my conversation with Cemre Yeşil Gönenli at her bookshop FILbooks in Karaköy, Istanbul. You can find links to her work in the text section of the podcast, as well as images of her books on our website, vernacularsocialclub.org. That is our club's website for those interested in vernacular photography. Have a look. We produce publications and stories on vernacular photography. As I mentioned in the beginning, for those who prefer a quick insight into Cemre's world, here is a summary of what I took away from this conversation. What will certainly stay with me is her search for what is not visible through photography. Whether this is through images of hidden mothers in vernacular photography, that means mothers that were holding their children towards the camera while hiding behind curtains or blankets. Also, her explorations of emotions within her family, or the political messages she reveals while working with archival material. Cemre is an educator and teaches photography and photo book making. She definitely advises not to put your work too early in book form, as the form might limit the process of the project. I think that is very good advice for anyone working on a project and would really like to make a book. And lastly, collaboration is key, because to Cemre, the life of a photographer is a lonely one. And she had an amazing collaboration with the German-Romanian photographer Maria Sturm, with whom she worked on a book called For Birds' Sake.
I mean, we started very differently, but then along the process, we sometimes didn't even remember who took which picture. And it was like, I think the reason why that project worked very well is that we became one in the end, and that we never thought about kind of doing, okay, these are Maria's pictures, this is Cemre's pictures. It was like two women becoming one in a world of men and birds. So I think that was the the magic behind that work.
Tune in next time to the Photo Vault. Lucas Birk says ciao.